The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Captain Marcus Thompson adjusted his uniform and prepared for what he assumed would be a routine inspection. At 42, Thompson had spent nearly 2 decades climbing the ranks of the armed forces. His weathered face told stories of deployments in harsh conditions, and his chest displayed ribbons earned through years of dedicated service. He had seen young officers come and go, but few had earned his respect quickly. Thompson believed in tradition, hierarchy, and earning one's place through blood, sweat, and time served. He had little patience for what he called fast-track promotions, or officers who seemed to advance based on anything other than pure merit and experience. This morning, he was about to meet someone who would challenge every assumption he held about military leadership. Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood outside the main administrative building, reviewing her orders one final time. At 28, she appeared younger than her years, with an unassuming presence that often caused others to underestimate her capabilities. Her uniform was crisp and properly arranged, but she carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from years of specialized training most people never knew existed. Chen had arrived at Fort Bradley 3 days earlier, assigned to oversee a classified operation that would test the base's security protocols. Her orders came directly from the Pentagon, but the details remained hidden behind layers of classification that even senior officers couldn't access. She understood that her age and appearance would likely create skepticism among the base personnel, but she had faced similar challenges throughout her career. The assignment at Fort Bradley was particularly sensitive because it involved testing the base's readiness for asymmetric threats. Chen's background in psychological operations and advanced reconnaissance made her uniquely qualified for this type of evaluation, but her credentials remained classified at a level that prevented casual verification. Thompson received the notification about Lieutenant Chen's arrival through standard channels, but the paperwork seemed oddly sparse. Usually, when a new officer arrived for temporary assignment, their file contained detailed information about previous postings, commendations, and specific qualifications. Chen's file contained the basics but lacked the usual depth that Thompson expected for someone assigned to work directly with base security. The morning briefing had been postponed to accommodate Chen's arrival, and Thompson found himself growing irritated by the disruption to his carefully planned schedule. He prided himself on running an efficient operation, and unexpected changes always put him on edge. As he walked toward the meeting point, he mentally prepared his standard speech for new officers about expectations and protocols. Chen waited near the vehicle pool, observing the morning routine of the base. Soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for various training exercises and maintenance duties. She noted the security measures, the communication patterns, and the general atmosphere of the installation. These observations would become important data points in her eventual assessment. When Thompson approached, Chen stood at attention and offered a crisp salute. Her military bearing was correct, but Thompson immediately noticed her apparent youth and began forming assumptions about her experience level. He returned the salute with the mechanical precision of someone who had performed the gesture thousands of times. "Lieutenant Chen, I presume?" Thompson said, his tone carrying a hint of formality that bordered on coldness. "I'm Captain Thompson, Base Security Chief. I understand you're here for some kind of evaluation exercise." "Yes, sir," Chen replied. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with your team. I understand Fort Bradley has an excellent reputation for operational readiness." Thompson nodded curtly, but his expression suggested skepticism rather than pride. "We run a tight ship here, Lieutenant. Our procedures have been refined over years of experience. I trust you'll find everything meets the standards you're accustomed to." The subtle emphasis on standards you're accustomed to carried an implication that Chen's standards might be lower than those maintained at Fort Bradley. Chen recognized the challenge in Thompson's words, but chose to respond diplomatically. "I'm sure I'll learn a great deal during my time here," she said. "The reputation of this base precedes it." Thompson began walking toward the main complex, expecting Chen to follow. As they moved through the base, he provided a running commentary on various facilities and procedures, but his tone suggested he was lecturing a junior officer, rather than briefing a colleague. Chen listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated her understanding of military operations. "How long have you been in service, Lieutenant?" Thompson asked as they paused near the communications center. 8 years, sir, Chen replied. Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly. 8 years seemed like a reasonable amount of time, but he wondered how someone so young could have accumulated significant experience in such a relatively short period. He had been a lieutenant for longer than Chen's entire career. "And where did you serve before this assignment?" Thompson continued. "Various locations, sir. My assignments have been primarily in specialized roles that required frequent relocation." The vague nature of Chen's response irritated Thompson further. He preferred direct answers and detailed information. Military personnel typically enjoyed sharing stories about their previous postings, especially when those postings involved interesting or challenging locations. Chen's reluctance to provide specifics struck him as either secretive or inexperienced. "Specialized roles?" Thompson pressed. "What kind of specialization?" Chen paused briefly before responding. "Intelligence support and operational assessment, sir. Much of my work has been classified at levels that make casual discussion inappropriate." Thompson felt a flash of annoyance. Every junior officer seemed to claim involvement in classified operations these days, often exaggerating their actual responsibilities to appear more important. He suspected Chen was inflating her background to compensate for her obvious youth and limited experience. "Of course," Thompson said, with barely concealed skepticism. "Well, you'll find that our operations here are straightforward and transparent. We don't have much need for cloak and dagger activities." Chen recognized the dismissive tone but maintained her professional demeanor. She had encountered similar attitudes throughout her career, particularly from senior officers who equated age with competence and experience with wisdom. She understood Thompson's perspective even while disagreeing with his assumptions. As they continued the tour, Thompson pointed out various security features and explained protocols, with the air of someone teaching a student rather than briefing a colleague. Chen absorbed the information while making mental notes about potential vulnerabilities and areas for improvement. Her trained eye caught details that Thompson's commentary didn't address. The base's perimeter security relied heavily on traditional measures like fencing, guard posts, and electronic monitoring. While adequate for conventional threats, Chen noticed several potential weak points that a sophisticated adversary might exploit. The communication systems appeared robust but followed predictable patterns that could be analyzed and potentially compromised. Thompson's confidence in his security arrangements was evident, but Chen observed that this confidence might also represent a vulnerability. Organizations that believed their defenses were impenetrable often failed to anticipate unconventional attack methods or insider threats. "Lieutenant, I hope you understand that security assessments here are typically conducted by personnel with extensive field experience," Thompson said as they approached the command center. "Our last evaluation was performed by a colonel with 25 years of service and multiple combat deployments." The comparison was clearly intended to highlight Chen's perceived inexperience, but she responded calmly. "Different perspectives often provide valuable insights, sir. Sometimes fresh eyes can identify issues that familiarity might overlook." Thompson stopped walking and turned to face Chen directly. His expression showed the kind of patronizing patience that senior officers sometimes displayed when dealing with subordinates they considered naive. "Fresh eyes," he repeated. That's an interesting way to put it. In my experience, security assessment requires deep understanding of how things can go wrong in real-world situations. It's not an academic exercise." Chen met his gaze steadily. "I agree completely, sir. Real-world experience is essential for effective assessment." "And how much real-world experience do you have, Lieutenant? Combat deployments? Crisis management? Actual security breaches?" The questions came rapid-fire, designed to expose what Thompson assumed would be Chen's lack of practical experience. Chen paused, considering how much information she could reveal without violating her classification restrictions. "My experience has been varied, sir. I've worked in environments where traditional security measures weren't sufficient, and alternative approaches were necessary." Thompson shook his head slightly, interpreting her response as more vague deflection. "Alternative approaches. Right." His tone made clear that he viewed such language as bureaucratic doublespeak, designed to hide inexperience behind impressive-sounding phrases. The morning tour concluded at Thompson's office, where he intended to review Chen's specific assignment parameters. He gestured for her to take a seat across from his desk while he retrieved her file from a locked cabinet. The file was surprisingly thin, containing only basic assignment orders and minimal background information. "Your orders are somewhat unusual," Thompson said as he flipped through the limited paperwork. "Most assessment personnel arrive with detailed protocols and specific objectives. Your documentation seems rather sparse." Chen nodded. "The nature of this evaluation requires flexibility in methodology, sir. Rigid protocols might compromise the assessment's effectiveness." Thompson leaned back in his chair, studying Chen with growing skepticism. Everything about her assignment seemed irregular, from the limited documentation to her evasive responses about her background. He began to wonder if there had been some kind of administrative error, or if Chen was attempting to exceed her actual authority. "Lieutenant, I need to be direct with you," Thompson said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Security is my responsibility on this base. I can't allow any evaluation that might compromise our operations or put personnel at risk. If you can't provide specific details about your qualifications and objectives, I may need to contact headquarters for clarification." Chen had anticipated this moment. Thompson's skepticism was understandable and, in many ways, appropriate. A security chief should question unusual circumstances and demand verification of credentials. However, the classification level of her assignment made normal verification procedures impossible. "I understand your concerns, sir," Chen said carefully. "Perhaps we could arrange a secure communication with your superior officers to address any questions about my authorization." Thompson considered this suggestion. If Chen was legitimate, such a communication would confirm her status and allow the evaluation to proceed. If she was somehow misrepresenting herself, the inquiry would expose the deception quickly. "That sounds reasonable," Thompson agreed. "I'll contact Colonel Harrison at Division Headquarters. He can verify your assignment and provide any additional details about this evaluation." Chen nodded, knowing that Colonel Harrison had been briefed on her mission at a general level, though he lacked access to the specific details of her classification and background. The conversation would likely satisfy Thompson's immediate concerns, while maintaining the necessary operational security. As Thompson reached for his secure communication device, Chen observed his methodical approach to verification. His caution demonstrated the kind of thorough thinking that made him effective in his role, even if his initial assumptions about her capabilities were incorrect. The secure call to Colonel Harrison lasted several minutes, during which Thompson asked pointed questions about Chen's assignment, qualifications, and objectives. Chen could hear only Thompson's side of the conversation, but his gradually changing expression suggested that Harrison was providing satisfactory responses. "I understand, sir," Thompson said near the end of the call. "Yes, I'll provide full cooperation. Thank you for the clarification." Thompson ended the call and turned back to Chen with a slightly modified attitude. While still somewhat skeptical, he appeared more willing to accept her legitimacy. "Colonel Harrison confirms your assignment," Thompson said. "He indicates that your evaluation has high-level authorization and should receive priority support. However, he couldn't provide specific details about your background or methodology." Chen appreciated Harrison's careful handling of the situation. The colonel had confirmed her legitimacy without revealing classified information, walking a fine line between verification and security. "The classification requirements are necessary for operational effectiveness," Chen explained. "I assure you that my evaluation will be conducted with full respect for base security and personnel safety." Thompson remained somewhat unconvinced but recognized that he had received direct orders to cooperate. His military discipline required compliance even when he harbored personal doubts about the wisdom of those orders. "Very well, Lieutenant," Thompson said. "You'll have access to the facilities and personnel necessary for your assessment. However, I want to be informed of any activities that might impact normal operations." Chen agreed to keep Thompson informed within the constraints of her security requirements. She understood his position and respected his commitment to protecting the base's interests. The challenge would be conducting her evaluation effectively while managing Thompson's skepticism and maintaining necessary operational security. The first day's interactions had established the basic dynamic that would characterize Chen's assignment at Fort Bradley. Thompson's doubt about her qualifications created tension that would influence all their subsequent interactions, but it also provided valuable insight into the base's security culture and decision-making processes. The second day of Lieutenant Chen's assignment began before dawn, with an incident that would significantly escalate the tension between her and Captain Thompson. Chen had spent the early morning hours conducting a preliminary security assessment, moving through areas of the base that most personnel wouldn't access during normal operations. Her specialized training allowed her to identify potential vulnerabilities that weren't apparent during standard inspections. Chen discovered several concerning weaknesses in the base's perimeter monitoring system, including blind spots in camera coverage and predictable patterns in guard rotations that a knowledgeable adversary could exploit. Thompson arrived at his office to find a detailed report waiting on his desk. Chen had documented her findings with professional precision, but the implications were uncomfortable for someone who prided himself on maintaining exceptional security standards. The report suggested that Fort Bradley's defenses, while adequate for conventional threats, contained significant gaps that could be exploited by sophisticated opponents. Reading through Chen's analysis, Thompson felt his skepticism transform into irritation. The young lieutenant was essentially criticizing security arrangements that had been developed and refined over years of experience. Thompson had personally overseen many of the protocols Chen was questioning, and he viewed her critique as both presumptuous and uninformed. Thompson called Chen to his office immediately after reviewing the report. When she arrived, his expression made clear that their conversation would be more confrontational than their previous interactions. "Lieutenant, I've read your preliminary assessment," Thompson began, holding up the document with obvious displeasure. "I have to say, I'm surprised by some of your conclusions." Chen maintained her professional demeanor despite Thompson's clearly antagonistic tone. "Could you specify which aspects concern you, sir?" "Well, for starters, you've identified what you call critical vulnerabilities in our perimeter security," Thompson said, reading directly from her report. "These are systems that have been tested and proven effective over years of operation. The systems are well designed for traditional security threats," Chen replied diplomatically. "However, modern adversaries often employ unconventional methods that might not have been anticipated when these protocols were established." Thompson leaned forward in his chair, his voice taking on a challenging edge. "And what exactly is your basis for understanding these modern adversaries, Lieutenant? What experience do you have with actual security breaches or attempted infiltrations?" The question put Chen in a difficult position. Her actual experience included multiple classified operations, where she had successfully penetrated supposedly secure facilities, but revealing such information would violate her security clearances. She had to find a way to defend her assessment without compromising operational security. "My training and previous assignments have provided insight into various threat methodologies," Chen said carefully. "The assessment is based on established vulnerability analysis techniques." Thompson stood up abruptly, clearly frustrated by what he perceived as continued evasiveness. "Established techniques. Training, previous assignments. Lieutenant, you keep giving me abstract answers instead of concrete information. How am I supposed to trust your judgment when you won't provide specific credentials?" Chen understood Thompson's frustration but remained constrained by classification requirements. "Sir, I realize that the security limitations are challenging, but I assure you that my recommendations are based on solid analytical foundations." "Analytical foundations," Thompson repeated with obvious disdain. "That sounds like something they teach in staff college, not something learned through actual field experience." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on Thompson's door. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, the base's senior security technician, entered with an expression of concern. "Captain, we've got a situation with the eastern perimeter sensors," Rodriguez announced. "Multiple false alarms overnight, and this morning we discovered evidence that someone accessed restricted areas without authorization." Thompson's attention immediately shifted to this potential security breach. "What kind of evidence?" "Footprints in areas that should have been secure, and some of our motion detectors show activation patterns that don't match normal guard routes," Rodriguez explained. "It looks like someone with detailed knowledge of our systems managed to move through sensitive areas undetected." Thompson felt a chill of realization as he remembered Chen's early morning activities. He turned to look at her with a new understanding that was equal parts alarm and anger. "Lieutenant Chen, Where exactly were you between midnight and 5 a.m. this morning? Thompson asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Chen met his gaze calmly. I was conducting the preliminary assessment that I documented in my report, sir. You were accessing restricted areas without authorization? Thompson's voice rose with each word. You compromised base security to make a point about our vulnerabilities. I accessed areas that my assignment authorization permits, Chen replied. The purpose was to evaluate security effectiveness under realistic conditions. Thompson's face flushed with anger. The idea that a junior officer had deliberately bypassed his security systems struck him as both insubordinate and reckless. You had no right to conduct unauthorized penetration testing without clearing it through proper channels. Rodriguez looked between Thompson and Chen with growing confusion. Ma'am, if you were conducting authorized testing, we should have been notified. The security alerts caused significant concern among the overnight personnel. Chen realized that the situation was escalating beyond what she had anticipated. While her actions were technically within her authorized scope, the lack of coordination had created exactly the kind of disruption she had hoped to avoid. The testing methodology requires realistic conditions, Chen explained. Prior notification would have compromised the assessment's validity. Thompson slammed his hand on the desk, causing both Rodriguez and Chen to straighten. The testing methodology? Lieutenant, you essentially conducted an unauthorized infiltration of a secure military installation. That's not testing. That's a security breach. Sir, my authorization specifically permits, Chen began. I don't care what your authorization permits, Thompson interrupted. You deliberately circumvented security measures without coordination or notification. That violates every principle of responsible assessment. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably, sensing that he was witnessing a confrontation between officers that was beyond his pay grade. Captain, should I file an incident report about the security alerts? Thompson paused, considering the implications. An official incident report would create a permanent record of what he viewed as Chen's misconduct, but it would also document his own failure to prevent the security breach. Either way, the situation reflected poorly on his leadership. Hold off on the report for now, Sergeant, Thompson decided. I need to address this matter through appropriate command channels first. Rodriguez nodded and left the office, clearly relieved to escape the tense atmosphere. Thompson waited until the door closed before continuing his confrontation with Chen. Lieutenant, I'm beginning to think there's been a serious miscommunication about your role here, Thompson said, his voice controlled but cold. Security assessment doesn't typically involve actual penetration of the facility being evaluated. Chen maintained her composure despite Thompson's obvious hostility. Penetration testing is a standard component of comprehensive security evaluation, sir. Theoretical analysis alone cannot identify practical vulnerabilities. Not without coordination and approval, Thompson snapped. You can't just decide to test our defenses by actually breaching them. What if one of our sentries had encountered you? What if you had triggered our emergency response protocols? These were valid concerns that Chen had considered during her planning. Her training included techniques for avoiding detection and managing unexpected encounters, but Thompson's questions highlighted legitimate risks in her approach. I took precautions to minimize the risk of detection or confrontation, Chen said. My movement patterns were designed to avoid areas with active personnel. Precautions, Thompson said bitterly. You took precautions while deliberately compromising the security of a military installation. Do you understand how that sounds? Chen realized that Thompson's anger, while misdirected, came from genuine concern for his responsibilities and his personnel. His reaction demonstrated the kind of protective instinct that made him effective in his role, even when it created conflict with her mission requirements. I understand your concerns, sir, Chen said. Perhaps I should have coordinated more closely with your office before beginning the practical assessment phase. Thompson's anger was partly mollified by what sounded like an acknowledgement of error, but he remained deeply skeptical about Chen's judgment and qualifications. Lieutenant, in my opinion, you've demonstrated poor judgment and inadequate understanding of proper security protocols. I'm considering recommending that your assignment be terminated. The threat was serious, and Chen recognized that Thompson had the authority to create significant problems for her mission. While her orders came from higher authority, a negative report from the base security chief could compromise her effectiveness and potentially result in mission cancellation. Sir, I would ask that you allow me to demonstrate the value of my assessment methodology, Chen said. The information gathered through practical testing provides insights that theoretical analysis cannot achieve. Information gathered through reckless behavior isn't valuable if it compromises operational security, Thompson replied. You've proven that our systems have vulnerabilities, but you've also proven that you're willing to exploit those vulnerabilities, without regard for consequences. Chen understood that Thompson viewed her actions as betrayal of trust rather than legitimate assessment technique. His military background emphasized loyalty, cooperation, and adherence to proper procedures. Her approach, while professionally justified, violated his expectations about appropriate behavior. The consequences of leaving vulnerabilities unaddressed could be far more serious than the temporary disruption caused by testing, Chen pointed out. If hostile agents were to exploit these same weaknesses, the results could be catastrophic. Thompson shook his head dismissively. That's a theoretical argument, Lieutenant. Real security requires balancing protection against practical limitations. Perfect security is impossible, and attempting to achieve it often creates more problems than it solves. The philosophical disagreement between Thompson and Chen reflected different approaches to risk management and security planning. Thompson's experience emphasized practical measures that could be implemented and sustained over time. Chen's training focused on identifying and addressing every possible vulnerability regardless of implementation challenges. I agree that practical limitations must be considered, Chen conceded. However, the vulnerabilities I identified could be addressed through relatively minor modifications to existing procedures. Minor modifications? Thompson repeated skeptically. Every modification requires training, resources, and ongoing maintenance. Changes that seem minor to an analyst can create significant operational burdens for the personnel who must implement them. Chen appreciated Thompson's perspective on implementation challenges, but she remained convinced that the security improvements were necessary and achievable. The challenge was finding a way to demonstrate their value while rebuilding Thompson's trust in her professional judgment. Would it be helpful if I provided more detailed cost-benefit analysis for each recommended modification? Chen offered. Thompson considered the suggestion but remained doubtful about Chen's ability to produce realistic assessments. Lieutenant, cost-benefit analysis requires understanding the actual operational environment, not just theoretical security principles. I would welcome the opportunity to work more closely with your personnel to understand the operational constraints, Chen said. Effective security planning requires balancing ideal practices against real-world limitations. Thompson was somewhat surprised by Chen's apparent willingness to acknowledge the importance of operational considerations. Most of the staff officers he had encountered seemed to believe that field personnel should simply implement whatever recommendations emerged from their analysis. That would be a change from your previous approach, Thompson admitted. Your initial report read like a critique written by someone who had never actually managed security operations. Chen accepted the criticism as partially justified. While her technical analysis was sound, she had not adequately considered the perspective of personnel responsible for implementing and maintaining security measures. Her training emphasized identifying vulnerabilities, but practical security required balancing multiple competing priorities. I may have focused too narrowly on technical vulnerabilities without adequate consideration of operational factors, Chen acknowledged. A more collaborative approach might produce more useful recommendations. Thompson's hostility began to diminish slightly as Chen demonstrated what appeared to be genuine recognition of his concerns. While he remained skeptical about her qualifications and judgment, her willingness to acknowledge operational considerations suggested that productive cooperation might be possible. Collaboration requires trust, Lieutenant, Thompson said. Your unauthorized penetration testing didn't exactly build confidence in your respect for proper procedures. Chen understood that rebuilding Thompson's trust would require more than verbal acknowledgments. She would need to demonstrate through her actions that she could balance assessment requirements against operational responsibilities. How would you recommend that I proceed with the remaining assessment activities? Chen asked. I want to ensure that my methodology addresses your concerns while fulfilling my mission requirements. Thompson paused, considering whether Chen's apparent change in attitude represented genuine recognition of her previous errors or simply tactical adjustment to avoid further confrontation. His experience suggested caution, but he also recognized the potential value of a properly conducted security assessment. Any future testing activities must be coordinated through my office, Thompson said firmly. I need advance notification of your plans, including specific objectives, methods, and timing. No more surprise penetrations. Chen agreed to the coordination requirements, understanding that Thompson's insistence on prior approval was reasonable given the disruption caused by her previous approach. While advance notification would somewhat limit the realism of her testing, it would also prevent the kind of misunderstandings that had created conflict. The remainder of their conversation focused on establishing protocols for Chen's future assessment activities. Thompson insisted on detailed briefings before any practical testing, while Chen emphasized the importance of maintaining sufficient operational security to ensure meaningful results. By the end of their meeting, both officers had reached an uneasy compromise that allowed Chen's mission to continue while addressing Thompson's concerns about coordination and oversight. However, the fundamental tension between their different approaches to security assessment remained unresolved, setting the stage for further conflict as Chen's evaluation progressed. The third week of Lieutenant Chen's assignment brought events that would fundamentally alter Captain Thompson's perception of her capabilities and credibility. What began as routine coordination meetings evolved into a crisis that tested both officers in ways neither had anticipated. Chen had spent the intervening days working more collaboratively with Thompson's security team, providing advance notification of her assessment activities and incorporating operational feedback into her analysis. While Thompson remained skeptical about her qualifications, their working relationship had improved sufficiently to allow productive cooperation. The breakthrough came when Chen identified a pattern of unusual activity that suggested potential infiltration by hostile intelligence agents. Her analysis of communication patterns, personnel movements, and access logs revealed subtle anomalies that individually seemed insignificant but collectively indicated sophisticated surveillance of Fort Bradley's operations. Thompson's initial reaction to Chen's intelligence assessment was predictably dismissive. He viewed her concerns as typical analyst paranoia, the kind of conspiracy thinking that emerged when staff officers spent too much time looking for problems that didn't actually exist. Lieutenant, you're suggesting that enemy agents have penetrated our base based on statistical variations in routine activities, Thompson said during their morning briefing. That's a pretty significant leap from data analysis to espionage allegations. Chen had anticipated Thompson's skepticism and prepared a detailed presentation demonstrating the correlation between the anomalies she had identified and known indicators of intelligence-gathering activities. Her analysis drew on classified databases and threat assessment protocols that Thompson couldn't access, making verification of her conclusions impossible through normal channels. The pattern matches established signatures for preliminary intelligence gathering, Chen explained. The activities are subtle and dispersed, but they follow methodologies consistent with professional operations. Thompson studied the charts and graphs Chen had prepared, but the technical analysis didn't convince him that her dramatic conclusions were justified. Even if these patterns are unusual, that doesn't necessarily mean hostile activity. Military bases generate enormous amounts of data, and random variations are inevitable. The variations aren't random, Chen insisted. The timing, frequency, and distribution all indicate deliberate coordination. Someone with detailed knowledge of our operations is systematically gathering intelligence. Thompson leaned back in his chair, his expression showing the kind of patient skepticism he reserved for theories he considered far-fetched. Lieutenant, if there were actual enemy agents operating on this base, don't you think we would have detected them through conventional security measures? Chen's response highlighted the fundamental difference between her approach and Thompson's traditional security thinking. Sophisticated adversaries specifically design their operations to avoid detection by conventional measures. They exploit the assumption that standard protocols will identify all threats. So your theory is that our security is ineffective because it doesn't detect threats that are designed to be undetectable, Thompson said with obvious irony. That's convenient reasoning for someone whose job is to find problems with existing systems. Chen understood that Thompson's skepticism came from years of experience with false alarms and overblown threat assessments. Security personnel learned to filter out noise and focus on credible, actionable intelligence. Her conclusions, while based on sophisticated analysis, lacked the kind of concrete evidence that operational security required. I realize that the evidence is circumstantial, Chen admitted. However, The potential consequences of ignoring these indicators could be catastrophic if my analysis is correct. Thompson had heard similar arguments throughout his career, usually from analysts who believed their theoretical models were more reliable than practical experience. The potential consequences of acting on false alarms can also be significant, Lieutenant. Security resources aren't unlimited, and chasing shadows reduces our ability to address real threats. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Base Communications Center. Specialist Jennifer Walsh, the senior communications technician, reported unusual activity in the base's electronic systems that appeared to confirm some of Chen's concerns. Captain, we're detecting unauthorized data access attempts across multiple systems, Walsh announced over the secure intercom. The intrusion attempts are sophisticated and appear to be coordinated. Thompson immediately shifted into crisis mode, his skepticism about Chen's analysis temporarily set aside in favor of responding to an apparent active threat. What kind of access are they attempting? Personnel records, operational schedules, and communication logs? Walsh replied, the attempts are being made from multiple access points, both internal and external. It looks like someone with legitimate credentials is conducting unauthorized queries. Chen felt a mixture of vindication and alarm as the electronic intrusion confirmed her analytical predictions. However, she also recognized that the situation was escalating beyond the scope of her original assessment mission. This is consistent with the intelligence gathering pattern I identified, Chen told Thompson. The preliminary activities were probably preparation for this more direct approach. Thompson nodded grimly, his attention now focused on containing the immediate threat rather than debating Chen's analytical methods. Can we isolate the compromised systems and identify the source of the intrusions? Walsh's response revealed the sophistication of the attack. The access attempts are coming from multiple legitimate user accounts, but the query patterns don't match normal usage. It's possible that the credentials have been compromised, or that authorized users are acting under external influence. Chen's training in counterintelligence operations provided insights that Thompson's conventional security background didn't cover. This type of coordinated intrusion typically indicates a long-term intelligence operation. The agents have probably been gathering information and establishing access for weeks or months. Thompson looked at Chen with new attention, beginning to recognize that her analysis might have been more accurate than he had initially believed. If you're right about the timeline, then these agents were already in place before your assessment began. That would explain why my preliminary testing identified vulnerabilities. Chen agreed. The security gaps weren't theoretical problems, they were active exploitation routes being used by hostile operatives. The realization that Fort Bradley was under active intelligence attack transformed Thompson's perception of Chen's work. What he had viewed as academic analysis and reckless testing suddenly appeared as professional threat assessment that had identified a genuine security crisis. What do you recommend for containment and investigation? Thompson asked Chen, his tone now reflecting respect for her expertise rather than skepticism about her qualifications. Chen's response demonstrated the depth of knowledge she had been unable to reveal during their previous interactions. We need to implement immediate access restrictions while conducting forensic analysis of the compromised systems. However, the investigation must be conducted carefully to avoid alerting the operatives that their activities have been detected. Thompson was impressed by Chen's systematic approach to crisis management, but he also realized that her recommendations required capabilities that exceeded Fort Bradley's normal resources. The kind of investigation you're describing would typically require specialized personnel from higher headquarters. I can coordinate the investigation, Chen offered. My background includes training in counterintelligence operations and digital forensics. Thompson paused, struck by the implications of Chen's statement. Throughout their interactions, she had mentioned specialized training in classified assignments, but he had dismissed these claims as typical junior officer exaggeration. The current crisis suggested that her credentials might be more substantial than he had recognized. What exactly is your background, Lieutenant? Thompson asked directly. I've been assuming you were a staff officer with limited field experience, but your knowledge of counterintelligence operations suggests otherwise. Chen faced the familiar dilemma of explaining her qualifications without violating classification requirements. The current crisis provided justification for revealing some information, but she remained constrained by security protocols. My assignments have included specialized training in asymmetric threat assessment and counterintelligence operations, Chen said carefully. Much of my experience involves scenarios similar to what we're facing here. Thompson studied Chen's expression, beginning to suspect that her evasiveness about her background might reflect security requirements rather than inexperience. Are you telling me that your previous various assignments included actual counterintelligence work? I can't provide specific details without appropriate authorization, Chen replied. However, I can assure you that my training and experience are relevant to our current situation. The conversation was interrupted by another urgent communication from the base security center. Sergeant Rodriguez reported that their investigation of the electronic intrusions had identified one of the compromised user accounts as belonging to a recently transferred administrative clerk. Captain, the account belongs to Corporal Davis in Personnel Administration, Rodriguez announced. However, Davis is currently on medical leave and shouldn't have access to any systems. Thompson's jaw tightened as the implications became clear. Someone is using Davis's credentials to access our systems while he's off base. That means either his account was compromised, or someone with physical access to his authentication tokens is conducting the intrusions. Chen recognized the significance of this development. If the intrusions are being conducted using legitimate credentials from an internal source, it suggests that the operation includes either compromised personnel or actual infiltrators with access to authentication materials. Thompson turned to Chen with a new level of urgency in his voice. Lieutenant, if you have experience with this type of investigation, I need your help. This is beyond my normal security expertise. Chen appreciated Thompson's acknowledgement of her capabilities, but she also realized that effectively addressing the crisis would require revealing more about her background than she had previously been authorized to disclose. I can assist with the investigation, Chen confirmed. However, the methods I would recommend might require coordination with external agencies and classification at levels that could complicate normal base operations. Thompson didn't hesitate. Whatever classification or coordination is required, make it happen. The security of this base takes priority over administrative convenience. Chen understood that Thompson's desperation had created an opportunity to demonstrate her actual capabilities, but she also recognized the risks of revealing her true background before receiving proper authorization. The classified nature of her credentials meant that verification through normal channels remained impossible. I'll need to make some secure communications to arrange the necessary support, Chen said. The investigation will require resources that aren't available through standard base channels. Thompson nodded, his earlier skepticism completely replaced by urgent determination to address the security crisis. Do whatever you need to do. I'll provide any support you require. Chen excused herself to make the necessary communications, leaving Thompson to consider how dramatically his perception of the young lieutenant had changed. What had begun as routine cooperation with what he assumed was an inexperienced analyst had evolved into recognition that Chen possessed capabilities and authority far beyond what her apparent age and rank suggested. The secure communications Chen conducted over the next hour brought responses that surprised even her. The crisis at Fort Bradley had apparently activated protocols and resources that exceeded what she had expected for her original assessment mission. Higher headquarters was treating the incident as a significant counterintelligence operation requiring immediate and comprehensive response. When Chen returned to Thompson's office, her demeanor had subtly changed. While still respectful of his authority as base security chief, she now carried herself with the confidence of someone operating under clear authorization to take whatever actions were necessary to address the crisis. Sir, I've been authorized to implement a comprehensive counterintelligence investigation, Chen announced. The operation will involve personnel and resources from multiple agencies, but base security will maintain overall responsibility for protecting Fort Bradley's operations. Thompson was both relieved and concerned by this development. While he welcomed the additional expertise and resources, he also worried about losing control over security operations at his own installation. What does comprehensive investigation involve? Thompson asked. And what role will my security personnel play in the operation? Chen's response revealed the scope and sophistication of the resources being deployed to address the Fort Bradley situation. The investigation will include digital forensics, counterintelligence analysis, and potentially controlled operations to identify and neutralize the hostile network. Your personnel will provide essential support and local expertise. Thompson realized that the crisis had escalated far beyond anything he had previously experienced in his career. The involvement of multiple agencies and specialized resources suggested that the threat to Fort Bradley was more serious than even Chen's initial analysis had indicated. How long have you known that this kind of response might be necessary? Thompson asked, beginning to understand that Chen's assignment might have involved preparation for exactly this type of scenario. Chen paused, recognizing that Thompson deserved an honest answer even if she couldn't provide complete details. My original assessment mission included contingency planning for various threat scenarios. The current situation represents one of those contingencies. The admission confirmed Thompson's growing suspicion that Chen's assignment had involved much more than routine security evaluation. Her presence at Fort Bradley had apparently been part of a larger intelligence operation designed to identify and address sophisticated threats that conventional security measures might miss. The final phase of the Fort Bradley crisis began when Lieutenant Chen received authorization to reveal the full scope of her credentials and mission. The electronic intrusions had triggered protocols that required maximum transparency between all personnel involved in the counterintelligence operation, including Captain Thompson as the base security chief. Chen requested a private meeting with Thompson in a secure conference room that had been specially prepared for classified discussions. The room's electronic countermeasures and physical security exceeded the normal standards for base operations, indicating the sensitive nature of the information about to be shared. Captain Thompson, I've been authorized to provide you with complete information about my background and mission, Chen began. The current crisis requires full coordination between all security personnel, and that includes disclosure of information that has been classified until now. Thompson leaned forward, finally about to receive answers to questions that had troubled him since Chen's arrival. I'm ready to hear whatever you can tell me, Lieutenant. Chen reached into her uniform jacket and withdrew a small leather case that Thompson had never seen before. When she opened it, the contents caused Thompson's eyes to widen in surprise and recognition. Inside the case was a distinctive badge that Thompson immediately recognized as belonging to the Defense Intelligence Agency's Special Activities Division. The badge's unique design and serial number indicated that Chen held clearances and authority at levels far above what her apparent rank suggested. I'm Special Agent Sarah Chen, Defense Intelligence Agency, she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone finally able to reveal her true identity. My assignment to Fort Bradley was part of a classified operation to identify and neutralize a sophisticated intelligence network targeting multiple military installations. Thompson stared at the badge, processing the implications of Chen's revelation. The Defense Intelligence Agency's Special Activities Division was legendary within military intelligence circles, but its agents rarely revealed their affiliation even to senior officers. The fact that Chen was showing him her credentials indicated the extraordinary nature of their current situation. Special Agent, Thompson said slowly, testing the unfamiliar title, you've been operating undercover for the entire assignment. The cover identity was necessary to conduct realistic assessment of security vulnerabilities, Chen explained. Intelligence networks specifically target installations where they believe their activities won't be detected. My apparent inexperience was designed to avoid alerting potential operatives to the true nature of my mission. Thompson felt a mixture of embarrassment and admiration as he realized how completely he had misjudged Chen's capabilities. Every interaction they had shared took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of her actual identity and mission. Your questions about my experience and qualifications, Thompson said with dawning understanding. You were testing my security awareness while I was questioning your credibility. Chen nodded. Your skepticism about my background and methodology provided valuable intelligence about Fort Bradley's security culture. The fact that you demanded verification of my credentials demonstrated appropriate caution, even though the verification couldn't reveal my actual status. Thompson shook his head, amazed by the sophistication of Chen's operational approach. And your unauthorized penetration testing? That was a calculated risk to identify vulnerabilities that the intelligence network might exploit, Chen replied. The fact that I could breach your security measures without detection confirmed that hostile operatives with superior resources could do the same. The revelation transformed Thompson's understanding of every aspect of Chen's assignment. What he had interpreted as poor judgment and reckless behavior had actually been professional intelligence work conducted at the highest levels of government authorization. "The intelligence gathering you identified," Thompson continued, working through the implications. "You weren't discovering it, you were tracking it. I was monitoring a network that we've been investigating for several months," Chen confirmed. "Fort Bradley became a target because of its strategic importance and the sophistication of its operations. The network's interest in this base indicated that their intelligence gathering had reached an advanced stage. Thompson realized that Fort Bradley had been under surveillance by both hostile intelligence agents and friendly counterintelligence operatives simultaneously, with his own security personnel unaware of either presence. "How long have you known about the specific agents operating here?" Thompson asked. "We identified potential hostile activity approximately 6 weeks ago," Chen replied. "My assignment was designed to confirm the presence of operatives and gather evidence for neutralization operations." Thompson's respect for Chen's capabilities was now matched by concern about the scope of the threat they were facing. If this network has been operating for months, what kind of damage might they have already accomplished? Chen's expression grew serious as she considered the implications of the intelligence network's activities. "They've been systematically gathering information about operational procedures, personnel vulnerabilities, and communication protocols. The data they've collected could be used to compromise future operations or target key personnel." "What's our next step?" Thompson asked, ready to follow Chen's lead in addressing the crisis. "We're implementing a controlled operation to identify all network members and gather evidence of their activities," Chen explained. "The goal is to neutralize the entire network without alerting other hostile operations that we've discovered their methods." Thompson appreciated the strategic thinking behind Chen's approach, but he also worried about the risks involved in allowing hostile agents to continue operating while evidence was gathered. "How do we balance intelligence gathering against the immediate security threat?" Thompson asked. "The controlled operation includes safeguards to prevent additional intelligence compromise while we complete the investigation," Chen assured him. "Your security personnel will play crucial roles in monitoring and containing suspected operatives." The remainder of their conversation focused on coordinating the counterintelligence operation with base security procedures. Chen provided Thompson with detailed briefings on each suspected operative and the evidence that had been gathered about their activities. The sophistication of the intelligence network impressed and alarmed Thompson. The operatives had employed techniques that his conventional security training hadn't prepared him to detect or counter. Their success in gathering sensitive information demonstrated the limitations of traditional security approaches when facing modern threats. "This operation is going to require capabilities that exceed our normal resources," Thompson observed. "Specialized teams are already deploying to Fort Bradley," Chen confirmed. "However, the success of the operation depends on maintaining normal base operations while the investigation proceeds. Your personnel's continued professionalism will be essential." Thompson nodded, understanding that the next phase of the crisis would require exceptional performance from everyone under his command. "What do my people need to know about the operation?" "They'll receive briefings appropriate to their roles and clearance levels," Chen replied. "The operational security requirements mean that most personnel won't be told about the full scope of the investigation." Over the following days, Thompson watched Chen coordinate a complex counterintelligence operation that involved resources from multiple agencies and specialized units. Her ability to manage the various components while maintaining base security impressed him enormously. The professional expertise Chen demonstrated during the operation confirmed that her credentials and authority were genuine. She directed activities with the confidence of someone operating at the highest levels of government authorization, and her decisions consistently proved sound under the pressure of ongoing crisis. Thompson's role in the operation involved providing local expertise and ensuring that base operations continued normally despite the investigation. He found himself working more closely with Chen than ever before, developing professional respect that completely replaced his earlier skepticism. The breakthrough came when the controlled operation successfully identified the complete intelligence network operating at Fort Bradley. Chen's patient approach to gathering evidence had allowed investigators to map connections between operatives and trace their communication methods back to their handlers. We've identified 7 individuals involved in the network. Chen briefed Thompson as the operation reached its conclusion. 3 are base personnel who were recruited or compromised by external operatives, and 4 are external agents who gained access through various cover identities. Thompson was sobered by the extent of the penetration. 7 operatives represents a significant intelligence operation. The network's sophistication and resources indicate state-level sponsorship, Chen agreed. The information they gathered could have been used to compromise multiple installations if we hadn't detected their activities. The successful neutralization of the intelligence network vindicated Chen's analytical methods and operational approach. Her initial assessment had identified genuine threats that conventional security measures had missed, and her investigation had prevented potentially catastrophic intelligence compromise. Thompson participated in the final phase of the operation, which involved simultaneously arresting the identified operatives and securing the evidence of their activities. The coordination required to execute such a complex operation simultaneously across multiple locations demonstrated the capabilities of the agencies Chen represented. The operation's success depended on the cooperation we achieved between your security personnel and our specialized resources, Chen told Thompson after the arrests were completed. Your team's professionalism made the difference between success and failure. Thompson appreciated Chen's recognition of his personnel's contributions, but he also understood that her leadership had been essential to achieving the operation's objectives. I have to admit, Agent Chen, you've changed my perspective on intelligence operations and security assessment. Chen smiled, the first completely relaxed expression Thompson had seen from her during the entire assignment. I hope the experience has been educational for both of us. Your operational insights improved our investigation methods significantly. Thompson reflected on how dramatically his understanding of both Chen and the threats facing Fort Bradley had evolved during the assignment. What happens next? Do we expect similar intelligence operations at other installations? The investigation of this network will provide intelligence about broader hostile activities, Chen replied. However, the methods they employed will certainly be adapted and used against other targets. Thompson realized that the Fort Bradley operation represented just one engagement in an ongoing intelligence conflict that most military personnel never saw. And your role in addressing these threats? My assignment here concludes with the network's neutralization, Chen said. However, the Defense Intelligence Agency's mission to protect military installations from sophisticated threats continues. Thompson understood that Chen would move on to other assignments and other threats, taking her expertise to installations that faced similar challenges. I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with you, Agent Chen. This experience has taught me more about modern security threats than years of conventional training. Chen appreciated Thompson's acknowledgement, knowing that their initial conflict had ultimately strengthened the operation's effectiveness. Your skepticism about my credentials actually improved our security posture. A security chief should question unusual circumstances and demand verification of authority. The final administrative tasks included debriefing sessions where Thompson and his personnel provided detailed accounts of the operation for official records. The classified nature of the investigation meant that most aspects would never be publicly acknowledged, but the intelligence gathered would inform future counterintelligence operations. Chen's departure from Fort Bradley marked the end of an assignment that had transformed both officers' understanding of their professional responsibilities. Thompson had learned that modern security threats required capabilities beyond conventional military training, while Chen had gained appreciation for the operational challenges faced by personnel responsible for implementing security measures. The classified badge that had revealed Chen's true identity was returned to its concealed position, ready for future assignments where her cover identity would once again hide her actual capabilities. Thompson knew that he might never learn the details of her subsequent operations, but he would remember the lessons learned during their collaboration. The Fort Bradley counterintelligence operation became a case study in successful cooperation between operational security personnel and specialized intelligence assets. The success demonstrated that effective defense against sophisticated threats required combining traditional military expertise with advanced intelligence capabilities. Thompson continued his duties as base security chief with enhanced understanding of the threats facing military installations and the resources available to address those threats. His experience with Chen had prepared him to recognize and respond to intelligence indicators that might have been missed under his previous security paradigm. The operation's conclusion marked the beginning of ongoing vigilance rather than the end of the threat. Thompson understood that the intelligence networks targeting military installations would continue to evolve their methods, requiring constant adaptation of defensive measures and investigative techniques. Chen's final report commended Thompson's professionalism and adaptability under crisis conditions. Her assessment noted that his initial skepticism, while challenging for the operation, had ultimately strengthened security procedures and demonstrated the importance of verification protocols in protecting classified activities. The classified badge remained a symbol of authority and capability that most personnel would never see, but its revelation at Fort Bradley had demonstrated the sophisticated resources available to protect national security interests against the most advanced threats.